Weebles wobbles, but they don't fall down. Now I'm going to read someone's comment at the end of this, but I thought I'd get to the point first. The Sun, Earth, and all of the planets in our solar system have a weird peculiarity. They're not orbiting the Sun exactly. All of this material has a center of gravity. Good reason to use it. All of it, all the planets and the stars, have a center of gravity that isn't absolutely at the center of the Sun or within the Sun necessarily. If you took all of the planets, all of them, and all of the moons, let's just do all the planets. All of the planets could fit between the space between the Earth and the Moon. All of them. And most of the moons. As one big lineup. So if they all lined up, they could all fit in a very dense space just between here and the Moon. The space between the Earth and the Moon will obviously hold Jupiter and Saturn and that sort of thing. Now that means there's a huge amount of space between the planets. And that also means that the Earth and the Moon, being that spacing, were obviously a very long distance away from the Sun based on its diameter. The mythology about this being very, very close is a little bit weird. Now, that does mean that the center of gravity, if you line them all up, and you can look up examples of this, would cause the center of gravity being within or at the dead center of the Sun to actually shift outward, if they were all lined up. Now, on Earth, that would cause a tidal force change that would change the water height. If you had daylight and all the planets on the opposite side of the Sun, this would be the worst case scenario, they would change the tidal height about a centimeter, no, actually about a millimeter. It's not that much of an influence. The Moon has more influence than the rest of the planets. And the Sun has more influence than the whole damn thing because the Sun is enormously freaking huge. It's still very far away, but the Sun and Moon in alignment are more of an effect on tidal forces on Earth than all of the planets lining up. Therefore, it's not going to cause earthquakes. Now, let's get on with the next one. We can actually measure the tidal force on Earth caused by this. We can also see the tidal force effect of all the planets on the Sun. It causes warps and distortions in the Sun because it's a gas giant, comparatively. This can also happen to the other planets like Jupiter. Now, here's the important thing. Because if you did this full lineup, everything on one side and the Sun over here, this would pull the center of gravity for the whole solar system outside of the Sun instead of dead center. It's mostly in the dead center. Would put it here, or maybe one whole Sun diameter out. That's still a tiny distance compared to the distance from here, from the Sun to even Mercury. Mercury is a very long distance away from the Sun by diameter ratio. All of the planets in the solar system orbit around the solar system's barycenter, but because they all orbit at different rates, they're not always lined up. This barycenter, the real center of gravity for our solar system, the center point, the pivot point, moves in and out of the Sun, and it's in various positions relative to the Sun. However, the orbits of the planets don't deviate around that. They deviate only around the dead center of the Sun primarily, independently, and then are affected by each other as they go past each other. But the distances between the planets are very large too. But yes, it does cause a warp in the dead center point of our solar system to be in the middle of the Sun most of the time and outside of the Sun some of the time. The last I checked is less than one Sun diameter, a lot less. The center of mass of every object in the solar system combined is consistently changing position as the barycenter. The solar system's barycenter range is almost always near the center of the Sun or at the center. It can be just outside of its surface or, according to some calculations, far outside. This can be observed on a regular basis to see what's happening by the surface of the Sun and also seeing what's happening with the various planets and tracking them. We keep tracking them for this reason, to detect any unknown objects. Please also realize that there's an asteroid field. We have very far outlying asteroids and or ice. We have a huge amount of material orbiting this star of ours. Now, the Sun's position, which we can check, against the barycenter, this ratio, is not wobbling outside of this range when you take into account all known objects, enough to indicate extra unknown objects. Now remember, the asteroid field generally is only centered on the Sun, but it can be considered centered on this barycenter, this effective quasi virtual center for the solar system. But they all seem to even out way too much for us to have an extra star or planet orbiting the sun. It's not wobbling or changing in a way that requires an uncalculated anomaly object. We haven't found any reason to assume there is one. The outer planets having some wobble to them has been detected, and there are excuse modes to say there must be some periodic interruption by some other object, but they're either A, an anomaly that goes through once in a while and probably never again, or B, something that swings through orbiting some other very large object further away, hint, hint, or C, a mistake in doing calculations because Pluto killer's wrong. Okay, let's get on with it though. Any non-fantasy object would have a very predictable orbit because it's not having an effect, or it would have to be incredibly small like a planet, so its effect would be so minimal as to make it untraceable until you happened along it. And if it had a very long orbit for 6,000 or 12,000 years or whatever, that's fine. But it's not creating a wobble in our solar system or any disruption that's detectable. If it didn't do that and it's in constant orbit, it's not relevant. It's also very small and or very far away, and probably both. If it was going in and out of orbit over a very long period of time, the only way you could make this assertion that it had to exist because you need to is to say someone in the past, at this point, over 10,000 years ago, which is really stretching it, had as good or better telescope equipment than we do, but there's no fucking record of it. The equipment. But somehow there's an oral tradition written on a cave wall that was lied about by the person you saw in that YouTube video to say there had to be a planet that goes through every X number of thousand years. Meanwhile, someone looking at the same cave painting said, we translated that 40 years ago. That's not what it says, you lying shit. So yeah, the story's bullshit. But okay, let's assume that it's possible. In order for you to have this be something that would fit that, it would have to be an undetectable object with modern technology, meaning it would not be detectable with ancient technologies. What about a flyby? You're still making it an object that's invisible. If it was seen, why would anyone assume that it comes back? That's a long enough period of time you'd have to claim that they'd seen it twice, which means you'd have to have a society, a culture, and an oral tradition or written tradition we don't have a copy of apparently for over 50,000 years, which there's no evidence for. And again, there's no telescopes or anything. There's no equipment. And there's nobody writing it down. And again, the origin story for this mythology is a mythology created on a fucking Discovery Channel show by someone lying about the writing on a wall that had been translated before he was fucking born. Well, it's interpretation. No, it's not subject to interpretation. Go fuck yourselves. So anyway, someone asked me a set of questions here. This person's not a jerk. I'm talking about where this comes from. And all of you are going to come here and troll. Let's get you out of the way. You'd have to find an anomaly in the motions of the sun and the planets. And you may have, and you could, but you'd have to show it happening. And other people would have to corroborate it instead of somebody making a claim on some YouTube video. But this influence would be so easy to miss it would also fall into error range. And, again, this would be a low mass object or very far out, and probably both. And it'd be in a stable orbit unless proven otherwise. And it'd have to be proven to exist beyond a shadow of a doubt. Binary stars are two stars orbiting a common center mass, normally, if not always, not inside of one of them. This implies that the barycenter is rarely, if ever, inside of or near one of the stars. Also, if you're claiming it's a binary star, they both have to be stars. Quote, 85% of all stars could be in binary pairs is not the same as they have been found to be in binary pairs. It was an estimate and a guess. That's actually the origin story for that 85. As many as 50% or over of sun-like stars are in binary pairs as well. But they're both sunlight, which means neither of them is invisible. A minority, a very tiny minority, have one that's darker and very close. We're in the star system you're claiming might have a binary pair. We would be able to see it because we're not literally hundreds of light years away. Also, if this is so freakishly common, close-up stars very close to us, there are a couple of binary pairs, but they're both bright, and we can see them both. Claiming that we have to have a magical one that's even closer to us that we can't see is begging to be told nope. If our sun twin had a surface that absorbed light or had no light visible, we would detect it as a blank spot in the sky. When people point cameras at the sky to try to see star systems or stars and detect new ones, they also detect where something is missing. That would indicate an object absorbed the light and got in front of it. That's how we detect objects rather than stars. And we also do that to make sure the film doesn't have bad grain, or the CCD imager didn't screw up, or the computer didn't screw up. This compare and contrast stuff is done constantly and is done automated with older images. No evidence of one of these things has been found for our star. It would also expect it to produce a distortion in time-space if it was dense enough to be something about the size of a planet, or dark, because that would be a black friggin' hole. Now someone's going to scream brown dwarf or some other damn thing. No, they still emit energy. And if you need to invent an object in space that you can't detect, then you're by definition saying that previous populations and the ancients wouldn't have detected it unless they were channeling Ramtha, which is another bullshit pathway we're not going into. Again, this origin story is somebody deliberately, not making a mistake, deliberately misquoting a chiseled in inscription or hieroglyphics or writing on a wall. It is not based in fact. Nibiru means intersection, like the corner of. Also, in reality, they have radar returns, emit electromagnetic noise, infrared, or in some cases, radiation itself. Compared to all other stars in an area, this star, ours, is odd because we have planets orbiting it instead of a binary twin. Oh, that's the other thing. The binary twins don't normally have rocky objects, asteroid fields, or planets orbiting them. Some of them do, but they're an extreme minority. Why don't we have a binary twin? Because that extra mass condensed into the planets we're on and are going to visit if Elon Musk gets away with it. Yeah, that's the missing part of the puzzle. The 85% might be binary. The rest are probably having planets orbit them. Yes, a binary pair could have planets orbiting it. But they would normally, after a couple of billion years, be torn to shit. Because it's a dynamic system. A single star, not a binary, is a much more stable system. And we still have comets flying in and out. An invisible, undetected exostar, or pair for this star, is not needed to exist because we don't have any anomalies that need to be explained. Having it be a periodic one and demanding it take 25,000 years means you're presuming that somebody in the past existed and recorded it. Next, everything before 300 BC in the Western world at least, and in most other areas before 4000 BC, virtually everything, was not written down. Most of the stuff that we have is oral tradition. Even the Bible itself is oral tradition from generation to generation, passed down faithfully, or as best as we could, game of telephone mode, and then written down one day because we had a writing system invented. Before that, it was doing what we do now, telling each other stories, to memorize history, and to learn our lessons, because that was how we communicated. And an inscription on a wall would be valid if someone did not deliberately lie about what it said so transparently. And as for Planet X, that's just a placeholder for when we find out Pluto exists, or whatever. Yes, the original Planet X was because we didn't understand there was another planet out there. And another version of it, an anomaly we detected, was because we measured incorrectly or assumed something about the mass of a planet when we were wrong. We made a mistake and didn't acknowledge the mistake. We assumed it meant something. Same thing with Pluto Killer trying to find yet another set of stars. I'm covering the subject. I have run out of time to cover the comment and questions. I'll leave a link to it. It's a pretty good discussion between me and another person, but he said, my favorite conspiracy theory story is the Nibiru story because it's nice to think we haven't discovered everything. I know, I'm sure we haven't. And yes, a planet could go bolting right through the solar system literally any time, but it would take 7 years to do it. And if it did that and didn't get captured, that means it's never going to come back. If it doesn't keep coming back on a really regular basis, it never does. And that's another example of something that can't be something recorded at one time and be assumed to happen again. Cyclic behavior happens over and over again. That's a one-shot. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that, and I hope I've covered the subject, even if I didn't cover the commentary. And thank you for the commentary. It was very useful.